I'm Holly Gabbitas, and this is Oliver Ukereghe, and we are MajorTim.space 2024 to 2025 Young Ambassadors. Today we are interviewing Sue Nelson. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sue, and I am a space writer and broadcaster, and I also produce radio programs, present them, and podcasts, and make short films. I'm also the co-host of the Space Boffins podcast.
Who or what inspired you to pursue a career in broadcasting?
It was probably the children's program Blue Peter. I really loved it when I was young. And in fact, when I went to university to study physics, I had my first meeting with my tutor, and the class got divided into several groups. And there were about 6 of us in a room with Dr. Brian Delph, his name was, absolutely lovely man. And he went round the group saying, "What do you want to be?" And people were saying, "Oh, I want to be a researcher." And someone else would say, "Oh, I want to be a medical physicist." And someone else would say, "Oh, I want to be a teacher." And I said, and I'd forgotten, but he reminded me of it years later, I said, "I want to be a Blue Peter presenter." So it was probably, I liked Valerie Singleton, but it was a presenter called John Noakes, way before your time, who was my absolute favorite. He was a bit of a daredevil. He would climb things like Nelson's Column in the middle of Trafalgar Square. I don't think he had a harness on, neither did the camera. He would do the most incredible things, was really friendly and fun, and I thought, wow, I'd love to do what he was doing.
Who is the most inspiring person you've ever met?
Oh, that is a hard one. That's really tough. I suppose there are so many people. I've been very lucky because I've interviewed a lot of astronauts, a lot of space scientists, and I've been so impressed by them because they're really dedicated people. But I think I'd have to go for, definitely in my top 3, Wally Funk. And that's not just because I wrote a book about her, but when you think about this woman who is now in her mid-80s, she tried to become an astronaut in the early 1960s, didn't get there, never gave up, did all sorts of training by herself, and then eventually went into space with Jeff Bezos a couple of years ago at the age of 82. You can't help but admire a woman like that.
What is your most memorable experience working for the BBC?
For the BBC, actually, it's harder, funnily enough, to call a memorable experience for the BBC, because you're working so hard and you're often in the newsroom and you're at a computer and you're writing, scripts, and you're working to deadlines. And I was a television news correspondent, so it really was full on. But probably going to see the annular eclipse in the Hebrides in Scotland. That I got sent to Cornwall to report on a total eclipse, but in 1999. But the weather was terrible, and you just didn't see it in its totality. Yes, the sky went dark, but it was all behind a cloud. So as I'd already seen an eclipse in Peru and knew exactly how brilliant they were, I wasn't I wasn't conned by the Cornwall one. But in Scotland, it was an annular eclipse. And an annular eclipse is where is a total eclipse? The sun is totally obscured by the moon. It's the right size so that you only see this black circle and these, bits of corona going around it. And in fact, I saw an eclipse just a couple of weeks ago in America, and it was unbelievable, absolutely brilliant. An annular eclipse is when the moon doesn't quite cover the whole of the sun. So you have this lovely glowing round ring around it. They call it the Ring of Fire. And being in this island, and it was Ulst or Uist, I think it's called. Is it Uist or Ulst? Uist. And it's a weird island for somebody who's from, Britain, because and the mainland, because there are no trees on the island. And we were right by a cliff, by a puffin colony. So there was no one around. There was just a lighthouse and a load of puffins. And it was cloudy, but we got a break in the cloud. So to see that and to see the ring go around when it went dark, that was really incredible. But actually, I've had far better experiences, well, I would say work experiences, while making podcasts and working for the European Space Agency, making short films for them. And for them, for working for ESA, I got to go on a centrifuge, which is that device which looks like a long spoke of a wheel, and it spins around a central point, round and round and round. And that's what astronauts go in, because they can simulate the G-forces that you get when you take off in a rocket or a shuttle, as there was. And that's what astronauts train in. And I got to go in one for the Space Boffins podcast. And we got to go 3 times at different, gradually getting higher and higher, until in the end, I experienced, I think it was 3.4 or 3.6 G. And that was slightly more than what astronauts experienced when they took off in a space shuttle on the back of a rocket. So I actually got to feel what it was like to be there during liftoff. And it was incredible, because the first 2 goes were okay. You feel like everything's being pushed down, but you can still raise your hands at like 2.8 G. You can still move. But when it got to this sort of 3.4, 3.6, the guy in my ear who was in the control room said, lift your hand. And I tried, and I couldn't lift my hand. The forces were that hard. And my face was going like this. And the guy was laughing in my ear, saying, we now know what you look like when you're a really old woman, because my just so that was really brilliant. And then my most memorable assignment working for the European Space Agency, that was for Space Boffins podcast. Working for ESA, I got to go in a 0G plane. I mean, they call it 0G, but it's actually microgravity. So there's a tiny bit there, but you still experience weightlessness. Again, another part of astronaut training. And it's when you're inside a jet plane that goes up, flies out, flew out. We left from France, and then we flew out sort of over the sea. And then it suddenly goes like really like 15 degrees, something like that. And it goes really high like that. And then at the top, it goes. And there's a period of about 20 seconds at the top of that parabola when you and everyone else on the plane suddenly is weightless. And you've probably seen like Tim Peake and pictures of astronaut, experience what that's like. And there are loads of scientific experiments on board. What they do is they take away all the seats from the middle of the jet plane. When you go, you're actually sat at the back with the scientists who are all about to do their experiments. So in the main bit of the plane, you've got all these experiments that they need to get results from and perform in this microgravity. So because you're doing that, and you can't just go up and just do once for 20 seconds, they need to spend more time. You actually do that up, over, weightless, and then down really fast as well. You do that, I think we did it 34 times. Now imagine if you're on like a roller coaster and you go up, down. Now for me, I'm really happy with that. I love roller coasters. But even though we all got given like an anti-motion sickness injection before we went up, there were still some scientists who were sat at the back of the plane who never left their seat, even though they'd been working, ages on their experiments and couldn't wait to try them out, because they were so sick. Which is why they call often these zero-G planes vomit comets, because I turned around and saw some scientists go, throwing up. But gosh, I loved it. And that's the closest I've got to feeling like an astronaut. Yeah, it felt like an astronaut training with the centrifuge, but this, to actually suddenly feel your body lift up and hit the ceiling of the plane, and you can't quite control yourself. It was an incredible experience, and one that I'm really grateful for having been able to do that, because I appreciate that not everyone gets an opportunity to do that. And I hope you two get that opportunity at some stage in your life to do it, because it's incredible. And it felt really natural. It didn't feel odd, which surprised me, which made me think, maybe human beings are built for space travel, and we'll go everywhere in the universe, because this was okay.
Who would be your dream person to interview?
Oh, I've been quite lucky in that a lot of the people I really am interested in, I have interviewed, particularly within space. So I've interviewed Buzz Aldrin, who was, one of the first men to walk on the moon. And I've interviewed other Apollo astronauts. I've interviewed a lot of shuttle astronauts, including like the ones that people know, like Chris Hadfield, Mike Massimino, who lots of people know because he was on The Big Bang Theory, Eileen Collins, who was the first woman to command the space shuttle. Trying to think who I've not interviewed space-wise. I mean, I think like everyone else, I would have loved to have interviewed Neil Armstrong, but because he was the first person on the moon. But he was quite reclusive and didn't really do many interviews before he died. So I think probably it might be him. I got to meet very briefly Valentina Tereshkova, who was the first woman, a Soviet cosmonaut on the moon, and also Alexei Leonov, who was the first, another Russian, who was the first person to do a spacewalk. So I've been really lucky with meeting people like that, because it's so interesting. And actually, the older they are, the more interesting it is to talk to them, because often when you're still in your career, they're bound by, companies don't want you to be too honest. So there's a certain formality there. Whereas the older they get, and if they've retired from being an astronaut, they loosen up a bit, they relax a bit more, and they're a bit more frank with what they can say. So yeah, for that, I think it might be Neil Armstrong.
You have won many awards throughout your career. Which of these are you most proud of?
Yeah, I've been very lucky. I was really pleased with the Sir Arthur Clarke Award for Wally Funk's Race for Space. Very, very, very proud of that, because I didn't get paid a lot to write the book. And it took a lot of effort on my part to get the book sold. And I was so keen on getting the story out, and so glad to get the story out. And it was only afterwards that people sort of appreciated that it was an important story to talk about people like Wally Funk and the members of the Mercury 13, the women who'd tried to become astronauts, that I felt, that was really worth it. Having said that, I've just been nominated for an ARIA, which is like a sort of radio equivalent of the Oscars, and I've never been nominated for that before. That's not been for a space program. That's been for a documentary called Inside an Autistic Mind, because I only discovered a few years ago that I'm actually autistic. And that program was an attempt to let people share what it's like inside my head. And I worked with a friend and a radio producer who I've worked with and have known for nearly 30 years. And so it was a really lovely experience. And the response afterwards was quite amazing. And it really helped people, which I'm really, really proud of. And in fact, one woman actually got in touch to say that her husband, who was autistic, had listened to the program. And after he heard it, he was inspired and thought, well, if she's able to overcome some of the anxiety that comes with autism, I can do it too. And he called a friend and he went to meet his friend, which might sound normal, but she said it was the first time he'd left the house in 5 years. So I'm incredibly proud of that.
How do you prepare for your interviews?
I do a lot of research. As a journalist, that's part of your job, and I really enjoy the research side of it. I don't use Wikipedia because it's unreliable. I look at every interview that's been done with them before. If they belong to a certain company, like if they work for NASA or ESA or wherever else, I will look at their biographies on their site. I will look at maybe the missions that they've done before. I will look at the news coverage that they've done before. Sometimes if I've got the time and they've written a book, I will get the book and I will read it if I've got the time to do it as well. So I really go into it to see, and then I try to write down questions that have, some of them will be the ones that maybe other people have asked before, which is fine, but then others I might try to think, oh, well, that really interests me, but I haven't seen that somebody else asked them that. So I will then try to look at different angles to ask them questions about, so that you don't just get the same answers that they've given everyone else before.
Do you think your book, Wally Funk's Race for Space, the extraordinary story of a female aviation pioneer, has helped their story become more publicly known? And do you think it inspires Jeff Bezos' decision to invite her to be on board his first manned commercial space flights?
I'd love to think so. I know from people in the UK that a lot of people got in touch and told me. And when Wally came over to the UK, and we spoke at like the National Space Centre in Leicester and the Science Museum in London, that many people came up to me and said, I never knew this happened. So I know that, yes, definitely it did bring that story to a much wider audience. I sort of assumed that people in the States would know, but it turned out that they didn't. And again, it's really gratifying to see that the number of people who had read the book had said, I had no idea, I didn't know. And these are Americans who didn't know and hadn't heard of it. So I hope, and I'm glad to have made a small mark in bringing that story to a wider audience. I did make a radio documentary about it in 1997 for the BBC, for Radio 4, and that also had an impact. But it's really funny the way, and this applies to a lot of history, it just gets lost. It's like a sort of memory loss that goes from generation to generation. And it goes out of people's minds. I don't know whether Jeff Bezos read the book or not, or whether he heard about Wally in another way. What I do know is that Wally's friend, who sadly died last year, her best friend Mary, told me that when Jeff Bezos went to visit Wally to offer her, this free flight into space, that he was incredibly nice. He was really interested in her. He knew a lot about space. He wanted to know about her life. and my opinion of him, which before then had only been based on, oh, he's the boss of Amazon, oh, he does this, oh, he does that, really sort of opened. And I thought, wow, here's somebody who actually was genuinely interested in her life, her role in space history. So hats off to him for making her dreams come true.
Did you spend a lot of time with Wally Funk when you were writing your book?
Not when I was writing it, but I spent quite a lot of time with her on making different radio programs and traveling around America and also around Europe. So, and I'd also known her for over 20 years, because we'd first met in the late 1990s. So we spent quite an intense period of time together, and we'd always kept in touch as well and spoken to each other over the phone. But it was those sort of big trips that made the difference. But I used all the interaction we'd had earlier and before to sort of add context and inform the book. But yeah, we did. We even shared, I think we shared a bedroom together at one point, and she stayed at my house as well when she came over to the UK. So we pretty much pretty close.
Was Wally disappointed when William Shatner took the title of oldest person in space, but she had only held this title for a little over 2 months?
Well, when I spoke to her after that, I don't think it bothered her that much, because she's still the oldest woman in space. So I think her attitude is very much, well, good on them. She wants everyone to have the opportunity to go into space. So no, I don't think she begrudged him his achievement at all. And I'm a big Star Trek fan. So, I loved William Shatner as Captain Kirk. And I thought his response and his description afterwards, if you've not seen it, watch it. He's really erudite and puts brilliantly into words the sort of emotions that he felt at the time. And I thought his descriptions were absolutely incredible and really brought across the sort of wonder and extraordinary activity of it. I think we take space travel for granted. I mean, look at SpaceX. They're launch rockets. I know they're not got people on board all the time, but rocket launches are happening every week. People go up to the space station all the time. It's become commonplace. And I think sometimes it takes someone who's not a professional, who goes up there for the first time, to suddenly remind people that, oh my goodness, this is an incredible technological feat. It's an inspirational feat, and that as human beings, we have always explored. We've always explored our planet, whether it's mountains or to the bottom of the oceans. And space is no different. I think by nature, I think we are explorers. And I'm so glad we're going back to the moon.
How do you start the process of writing your books? Do you need permission to write about anyone dead or alive?
I've often heard, what I tend to do is I email people and say, hi there, blah, blah, we met. Because working in radio, you record the interviews, and I tend to keep my interviews, or if I'm really interested in them. And what I do is transcribe the interviews as well. So I know that they're accurate. And I have had the odd astronaut who said to me, I never said that. And I'm just like, Well, actually, you did, because I've got it on tape. You know, you got it. And that's a useful thing, is I've actually got proof of what they did say. But I will, out of courtesy, also say to them, just so you know, our interview that we did then, I'm going to be using quotes from it for the book. I'm just letting you know if there's and nobody has ever said no, you can't. So that's what I do. But once people are basically, and also it's a courtesy, because if you've interviewed them for one thing, it's a courtesy to let them know, as I know I interviewed you for Space Boffins podcast or the BBC, but I'd now like to use it for my book about this. But as I say, no one has ever said no.
Out of all the books you've written, which is your favourite and why?
I've written, I think, well, I co-wrote How to Clone the Perfect Blonde with my husband, Richard Hollingham, who's also a space science journalist. And that was like, we did obviously half the book each. So that was like, I think 4 chapters each. And that was a series of essays, each about different subjects like time travel or cloning. And black holes. I did the one on black holes as well. But that wasn't and I also recently was one of the authors of The Year in Space, which was with for the Royal Astronomical Society and the Supermassive podcast. But actually, probably writing the Wally Funk book was the most enjoyable, because that was fully just me as the author and not writing with somebody else. And it had a narrative as well. Yeah, it had a story, it had history, and it was, well, for me it was funny as well, because Wally is funny. So I liked all the humor in it from her experiences and the way she was, and I really wanted to get across how mercurial she is and what a whirlwind she is, and how she is just like, she's like a sort of fizzing firework that's sort of fallen over on a, you know, from the grass, and is going everywhere, you know, and I really wanted to get that across. And so when it comes to writing, that's quite an enjoyable thing to do. So it's different to, say, writing an article or an essay. It's much more creative for me, so I really enjoyed it.
Which of your works written or TV are you most proud of?
Well, that probably would come back to what we were chatting about before, probably the book, and also that Inside an Autistic Mind documentary, I think, definitely. Although I've spent almost probably a decade or more working in TV, I can't honestly say I'm particularly proud of any of it. That doesn't mean I'm not embarrassed by it or think it was awful. I think I was a good correspondent, a good science correspondent, and I covered loads of subjects, not just sort of space and space missions and launches, but it could be anything. It could be botany, it could be astronomy, it could be chemistry, it could be, medical science. But it's very much like a factory worker, because every day the news is different. So it's really hard work, and it's fast work. You might have planned maybe to work on a specific story. Say it was about genetically modified crops, and you will have done all your research. And then all of a sudden, on the morning of the day when you're due to maybe film it or report on it, you suddenly get called by an editor and say, no, we don't want you to do that. We don't want you to do GM crops now. We want you to do rising levels of carbon dioxide in peat bogs or something. And you're like, and then the whole day is like a crazy, crazy day of, oh my goodness, I've got to learn about this. I've quickly got to research this. I've got to do this. I've got to change it. I've got to do that. And while I could do it, I can't say I enjoyed the process of doing it. There's no time to think. There's no time to go, because as soon as you're off air, you're told, all right, we want you to do this story now. So that's why TV career for me was like, yeah, sure, fine. I prefer more in depth. I preferred radio docs. I prefer writing. I probably enjoyed working for the European Space Agency more than I did being a BBC science correspondent, because we had more time to make these short films on the science of their missions. And you also had the time then to get to go to Darmstadt in Germany, or Noordwijk in the Netherlands, where ESA has various sites. And you really get to know the space scientists and engineers involved. They've got time for you. They explain it. You get much more of an in-depth understanding of what's going on, and not just the science of it, but also maybe the dynamics of the flight trajectory and the personalities of those involved. I mean, these are often scientists who've worked decades on one mission, and it becomes much more personal. And I became really very fond of a lot of the people I interviewed and reported on when I worked for the European Space Agency, because I did admire what they did. I liked their commitments. They got better at communicating as well. The longer you knew them, the better they got at talking to the media. So it was a journey we went on together, particularly like the Rosetta mission, which was the mission that ESA sent to a comet, and it was the first ever mission that would land on a comet with the Philae lander. I basically spent maybe a decade with these scientists, sort of working in the run-up with the launch, because it took so long to get there, and then the actual orbiting around the comet and the science they got from that, and then the landing on the comet, and then you get all that interesting stuff. And then the mission's over, but it's actually not over, because you then spend a couple of years reporting on the science that they've got from the mission. So having that experience was really professionally incredibly rewarding.
I've noticed that through your production company, Boffin Media, you
Mhm.
provide training for those who work within media and podcasting. Could you share some of the tips that you provide for creating a podcast?
Sure. Well, okay, let's do an easy one, as we're doing, this via a remote thing. There are various ways to sit, and there's lighting, and there's eye contact. So, for instance, before I came on, my laptop is on 4 books, so that I'm not looking down, and that my eye line is pretty much level with the camera at the top of my computer. If I was to, let me bring it forward. If I was to put my laptop on the table, can you see the difference in the set? I'm further away, and also you then tend to look down, and that's not as good a shot. So it's much better if you're on the level and you're filling the film. As actually, you two are not doing too bad. Although I would say, if I was training you, or Oliver, I would say you need to come a little bit closer, so that we have you more in shot. Lighting. I've got a window that way, but actually I've also put, and I'll show you, a desk lamp there. Because if I was to turn that off, can you now see one side of my face is in shadow? So just the simple use of a desk lamp makes a big difference in how the shot looks. So it's always best to have your laptop not with the window to a right or the left. You don't want the window behind you. If the window's behind you, you will be in silhouette and even darker. You also, so we've got lighting, we've got position, eye contact, and positioning of yourself too. You don't want to be sort of to the left, to the right, you need to be positioned so that you're in the center. So those three things alone, the eye contact, the lighting, the positioning, ensuring that your background doesn't have anything that's really embarrassing, in the background. I mean, what have I got? Okay, I've got a clanger up there. I've got, carefully placed books that I've worked on. That one. We got a TARDIS. That's okay. Wally Funk's thing, I think. But sometimes if I'm doing something that's really serious, I'm going to take the TARDIS away, and the clanger, because if people are listening to you talk about a really serious subject and you've got something like that, all people are going to do is saying, oh my goodness, she's talking about the death of this or death of that, and she's got a clanger in the background. Oh, she's got TARDIS is that. And you don't want people to be too distracted about what's in the background. So you always, work it accordingly.
I read that you were included in a game show. Could you tell us more about the experience and whether or not it was more of a challenge than working on other productions?
What did you say at the beginning there? I didn't quite catch you.
I read that you were what's it called? I read that you were in a game show.
I have written for a game show. Yeah. Is that what you mean? Or do you mean in a game show? I have taken part in like panel game shows before for radio. And they're quite fun. Writing for it. Yeah, well, I've done quite a few bits of different types of journalism. Alongside science journalism, I've also done comedy writing. So I've written for like a Canal Cafe Theatre in London for their news review when I was younger. And I got offered this job writing for a game show and had to come up with fun stories. It was actually it was like an early version of Would I Lie to You? It was almost exactly the same. But whereas they make stories on the spot, these would have writers write certain stories that the people would do. And I really enjoyed it. I loved it. I've also been a travel writer, and yeah, I like anything creative. I like looking at different treatments for things and sometimes mixing genres. So I have made science programs that mix science with comedy, science with detective stories. And yeah, no, I'm really happy. In fact, I famously got asked once by a producer. I'd written a science script and was about to record it on the microphone for the 1:00 news. And the producer rushed in and said, Sue, take that line out. Sue, you can't have that. Take it out. And I said, why? I said, it's funny. And he just reminded me and said, it's a science story. So sometimes I actually have to be really careful, not, put in a little gag about something. But yeah, no, I like it. My parents are from Liverpool and I'm from the Wirral. So I think humour is in my blood.
You are an executive producer alongside Richard Hollington of Space Boffins podcast. What was the inspiration behind the podcast and how did the name come about?
Yeah, well, I met Richard when we were both at the BBC, and we got married, I think 1998, and we've always sort of worked together as well as living together. Unfortunately, we get on really well, have loads in common, and we were sort of talking about how, we both love space so much. And we've both gone to like French Guiana to see, to work together to see an Ariane 4 launch, and just kept saying, and podcasts was sort of, we'd made podcasts for about 8 years in the for various companies and stuff, and we just said, why don't we do a space podcast? And we didn't have any sponsorship, we didn't have any anybody put money towards it. But at the time, we actually, we had enough work. We just thought, well, let's just do it ourselves. So in 2011, the first UK space conference took place in York, I think. And we thought, well, that would be a really good time to launch it. So we got, because both of us were chairing sessions there too. So we thought, oh, perfect. We've got a room full of people who are really interested in space. We could tell them when we do our, final thank you very much, or our introductions of who we are, we could tell them that we've, launched a space podcast. We got sort of little flyers made as well. So we took them and handed them round and got them there. I think while we were there, that was the first ever interview I did with Tim Peake. And I've interviewed him loads of times since then. And he was really friendly and funny. And he's been on the podcast loads of times since then. And that's how we started 2011 at the first UK Space Conference. And we've been now going 13 years, over 13 years, pretty much every month since then. So it came out of a love of space. That was it. Since then, we've been really lucky. We've been sponsored on and off by the UK Space Agency, by oh my goodness, I should remember them because they've been so brilliant. A space insurance company, and I'm sure their name will come up as soon as I think about who they are, but they've been absolutely brilliant. So we've been very lucky to have support. But we may occasionally have the odd periods where we don't have financial support for it, but we just do it anyway. And because we get to interview lots of people through, we might, both of us still work for the BBC, and we write for BBC Future often about space, or maybe making radio programs about space. Often we can double up. So we'll say, I'm interviewing for this. Would you be okay if we also did an interview with you for the Space Boffins podcast? So it works really well. We get great access to really brilliant people as well. So it's a fun thing that we really, enjoy doing.
You made some short films for the European Space Agency. Yeah, European Space Agency. Could you tell us about the process of being commissioned for this?
Yeah, I mean, I've touched on, what that involves already, but in terms of the commissioning, they would say, okay, we've got the James Webb Space Telescope. We've got some new new research coming out of it. We'd like you to do a piece. We need it in so many weeks' time. These are the really important bits, and then you go through that research procedure I mentioned earlier, and it might involve travel. It involves interviewing. You have to then interview the person in person with a camera. You then edit that so that you have sound bites, which are anything that could be 10 to 30 seconds long for those particular pieces. It's like having a jigsaw. Then you have material, you have the interviews you've done, you have to choose the bit that you want that has been said well and explained well, and then put those jigsaw pieces together so it makes a coherent story with a sort of, like any story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. You've got to ensure you get all the really important information in that story, because it's no good suddenly having written it and realize, oh, I actually forgot to say what they discovered. There are certain key things that you you need in it. You write a script. You then also, it's a lot of collaboration too between you and the whoever's commissioned it. So for the European Space Agency, it might be collaboration with the scientists to check the accuracy of it, because obviously you want everything to be scientifically accurate. And sometimes certain things can be quite tricky or quite complex, or, and so you go back and forth and say, can I just make sure, because you want to simplify it for a general audience, you can't assume that your audience has a PhD in astrophysics. And you have to make sure that when simplifying it, that you've not made a mistake and made it inaccurate in any way. So it's a lovely, enjoyable, collaborative experience that involves writing, researching, interviewing. So there's the social side of it, and then the sort of going back and editing it together. And I usually work with a VT editor who are really Paul Arison. Work with him a lot. He's a great editor who will then put the visual material together, and I will have gone through the images as well and put down the script. We'll use this bit of footage from that that report, or this bit from this, and you have to look up then web link addresses so that you put it in so they know where to get the right footage and where to download it, so that it all visually, then it's not just factually correct, that visually it looks really inviting, and so that somebody might be on their phone, just looking at it and thinking, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. And then you also, because lots of people do look at things like this on their phone and they're not listening on headphones, you have subtitles too. So that's another part of it, is to have the subtitles written, and they're not always exactly the same as what's said on the image, because if somebody goes well, you're not going to put you remove those things out, and you have to make sure that it doesn't come up so fast that you can't follow it, or is too small in terms of caption size so that you can't read it, and also that there are no spelling mistakes. So there are actually lots of different elements of this that you have to do in order to produce an end piece. And then when it's agreed by you and everyone's happy with it, then it finally gets signed off. And then sometimes you might want to put a music underneath it, and then you have to choose the music, because music can, and I know this from working in radio programs, music can make or break and affect what you're feeling. Because think, for instance, of if you're talking about something really happy, you wouldn't have slow violin music under it, because on the whole, that tends to be associated with emotional sadness or something like that. So you have to choose the tempo and the style of the music that fits whatever it is. And that, funnily enough, sometimes that can take the longest thing of all. So yeah, loads of different things to do. So this is what part of being a journalist is like, particularly when you cover different areas. I like it because there's lots of things to think about.
In recent years, you've been diagnosed with autism. Do you feel that this has had any impact on your career? And if so, in what way?
No, it's not affected my career at all. It's just gone on as usual. What was amazing was the number of people that I've worked with who sent me the most amazing messages of support, including a lot of people at the European Space Agency. Really lovely messages. And yeah, so actually it felt like a big warm hug from a lot of people. I think in some cases it's made some people a little bit more aware that, for instance, and this is particularly the case in mainland Europe, I don't want somebody to come and hug me and kiss me 3 times on the cheek. I find that, invading my body. So I just don't want that. And now it's quite funny that there's some people come to me and now they know they go to give me a kiss and then they go, so like as if they've suddenly remembered, no, they don't want to go too close to me for things like this. And also, I think it's made people be a bit more understanding about, I will take things very literally. So if anybody communicates me in any way, whether it's an email or verbally, if what they say can be taken in several ways, trust me, I will take it in several, I will be really like, oh. And so I'm often always clarifying, do you mean this? Do you mean that? Do you mean that? And that's where autism is actually really helpful for journalism, because it really makes you check and double check and make sure things are, right, and that you've got the right end of the stick. So I think people are a bit more understanding about that, is that they can't be subtle with me, because if they're too subtle with me, I will not get it. I need to be told directly, I need you to redo paragraph 3. Just put more emphasis on that. If somebody says to me, yeah, paragraph 3 just needs, just maybe tweak it. I mean, to be honest, any journalist would find that really annoying, but particularly for me, I'm just like, no, I can't. Maybe that, they would probably say something a bit more than that, but I need people to be really specific and clear. Otherwise, I can and often will not quite get the right end of the stick. But, I think that's okay. I can handle it.
Would you like to travel to space?
Oh, yeah.
If so, without factoring in logistics, would you choose to do so via a space agency or a commercial company?
Either, to be honest. I think any opportunity I would take. Absolutely. And I actually think they should put a journalist up in space, somebody who can write, somebody who can broadcast, somebody who can report and do live reporting. I'd be perfect. It's just because the early astronauts were quite disappointing sometimes, because they weren't chosen for their ability to be science communicators. They were chosen because they were amazing test pilots, but quite a few of them were just not good at describing how they felt or what happened. So I think it is important to send up musicians, artists, journalists, writers, broadcasters, as well as, scientists and engineers and qualified astronauts and what have you, because I think that will help get the importance and necessity for us all to consider a future off our planet.
Apart from broadcasting and writing, do you have any other hobbies?
I'm really into pickleball at the moment. I've been a very keen tennis player for a long time. And then a couple of years ago, I got a really bad knee injury while playing tennis and tore 3 ligaments in my knee. And then before Christmas, my knee was well enough for me to try pickleball. And I'm obsessed. I love it. So pickleball, I love wildflowers. I love going to the cinema, and I love theatre. So I go to the cinema and the theatre a lot, and I like writing. So I've got quite a few hobbies and obsessions, but they're the main ones, I think, at the moment.
What advice would you give to aspiring broadcasters?
I think if you want to be a broadcaster, try and get some form of journalistic training. It doesn't mean you have to study journalism at university or after school. It just means you can either do a course or maybe join a local radio station volunteering, or hospital radio, or a local paper, or just in any way. If you like writing, maybe write a blog. just the best way to learn and improve is to actually do it. But training is really useful to give you the basics of really important things like the legality of what you're writing so that you don't defame somebody. And that always worries me. When one of the beauties about blogs and the internet now is that everyone can write and everyone can put their work up, which is lovely, and I think that's the right thing to do. That doesn't make you a journalist. Because you've also got to be objective, and no matter what your personal views are, you have to put them aside and be as open as possible and to reflect every viewpoint on it. You can't, I really I don't like activist writing, which are people who are so politically into one side or the other, because often it's not accurate. So accuracy for me is a big thing, and that's something important in journalism. So yeah, do it, have a go, see if you like it. And I would say if you can, don't specialize in one medium. Do both, do radio and writing, or TV and radio, or TV and writing, because then you will always have work.
Are you writing another book? If so, what is it about?
I am actually in the middle of. I've just written a treatment for a book coming up, which would be related to autism, but I don't know yet. It's my agent will be putting it out fairly soon, so who knows? It might not get picked up, but if it does, then I'll be working on that very, very soon.
What subjects do you advise young people should focus on for broadcasting?
Well, that's the thing. You don't actually have to focus on any particular subject, because you can be a broadcaster or a podcaster whether you've studied English or geography or physics or maths. It doesn't matter. It's more about the ability to communicate what you've done. If you're going to be a specialist, or if you're going to do general news, to have the ability to look at a complex story, write it so that other people get it, and then be objective.
Thank you so much for this wonderful interview. It has been an honor.
Oh, well, thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you both. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.